Welcome back to the history of gaming Metal Gear. This episode is where we'll begin the gameplay and the history lesson of Metal Gear Solid 4. And to let you guys know exactly where that stands in this particular series, here is what we're covering in this series. So far, we've already completed Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, the games that were released for the MSX and started the franchise. We have done a technical review of Metal Gear Solid 1 for the PlayStation 1, and then completely played the entirety of Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes on the GameCube, a remake of Metal Gear 1. Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 were completed on the PS3 re-released versions. In the Legacy Collection, we did do a technical review of Metal Gear Acid 1 and 2, and we finished up Portable Ops just last night. Today, we start off with Metal Gear Solid 4. And as always, to be able to discuss video games from the Metal Gear franchise, you have to discuss the man who created. That's Hideo Kojima. Allow us to talk again about the career and where he was at the time. After the release of Metal Gear Solid 3, we fans of Metal Gear heard the words that we've always feared. Hideo states in an interview, "I'll be retiring from the Metal Gear series." I myself was devastated, but not surprised, as Hideo Kojima mentioned that he intended to put the series to rest with Metal Gear Solid 2, and somehow we still got Metal Gear Solid 3 and 3 PSP titles, so it was overdue, and this was inevitable. But it was over. It was the end. Metal Gear Solid 3 was to be the finality of Hideo Kojima's involvement in the Metal Gear series. And while Konami still owned the intellectual property, I, as well as most fans, knew that now, with there being no place for Hideo, there was no true place for Metal Gear. Now, what a bummer too, because we just got a taste of Big Boss in Metal Gear Solid 3, and we still don't know what happened to Solid Snake after Metal Gear Solid 2, especially after we were forced to play with Raiden, and we all hated that guy. So there's silence and sadness in the world for the rest of the year of 2004. We're all disappointed. No more Metal Gear. But then, a small beacon of light appears, something to distract us from our pain. It is announced that the 2005 E3 will be aired for the first time ever. We'll be able to see this as gamers. Something that the community, or the industry rather, was the only ones who were able to see this before. But, on top of that, Sony announces that prior to the E3 of 2005, they'll have a press conference. And I think to myself, it's probably their chance to announce the PlayStation 3 that just got leaked. Well, amazingly enough, the PlayStation 3 is announced, and I'm thinking, cool, but I'm not hyped up just yet. You know, let's see what games they have available for this. Let's see what they've got planned for us. And then it happens. And there we have it. The trailer that announces Metal Gear Solid 4. And Kojima was back, baby. A nice, tongue-in-cheek, kind of fun, silly little way of him tipping the hat to people didn't like Raiden. They wanted to see more from the series. And, you know, Hideo didn't have a place in the director's chair, you know, there at the beginning. A lot was said with that trailer, more than just Metal Gear Solid 4 is coming out. But he's back. Kojima will go on to co-direct Metal Gear Solid 4 with Shuyo Murata, who has worked on many of the Metal Gears as well as Zone of the Enders, so he's very familiar with the series and worked with Kojima quite a lot. So why all this drama about him retiring? And then all of a sudden he ends up on the game and he's working on it. Well, the reality is Kojima did intend and have full plans built out for him to hand the series over to Murata. But massive negative fan backlash, as well as death threats made not just to Kojima, but his production team, Kojima Productions, and Konami, made him and everyone involved nervous. Following this terrible display of fandom, Kojima decides to work with the team. He quickly becomes immersed into his work yet once again, and is no longer just a name in the credits, but back in the director's chair, once again, where the man belongs. Kojima would go on to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for Metal Gear Solid 4 at the 2008 MTV Game Awards. In his acceptance speech, he states, "I have to say, even though I have received this award, let me state that I will not retire. I will continue to create games as long as I live." He didn't say Metal Gear games as long as I live, but he did say games, and that's good enough for me. So, we have our announcement that the game is coming. But what about the gameplay? Well, we don't have to wait too long, because within the same year that the announcement trailer shows up, we have the Tokyo Game Show, where we get a very misleading trailer from Kojima, and this is a very good example of his viral and misleading tactics that we know him to be known for later. And it is here where I'll cut off that video, because it goes into quite a bit of content that I don't want to share with you quite yet. But we do get a great example of Kojima misleading us. We're watching the Tokyo Game Show, and we see this trailer for this new first-person shooter, and it looks good. You gotta remember the PlayStation 3 had just came out, and we're seeing this fantastic, flex of hardware. And then all of a sudden we find out this is no first-person shooter, this is Metal Gear. So we're off to the races. Kojima announces that, again, there is a theme associated with the development of this game. As we've previously covered, we've seen themes of genes, memes, and scene. This is seen in the previous Metal Gear Solid title. So with Metal Gear Solid 4, we have the theme of sense. Of course, this refers to the efforts put into not only the senses of the character, like sight and hearing and things like that, but also the sense of current events, having a pulse on the state of the world, in a sense. See what I did there? The majority of the remaining development details were shared with the public to drive excitement, but it's also the start of a trend that I don't like seeing in the industry. And I'm speaking of the habit of showing too much story and too many elements of gameplay and leaving so little to be discovered when the game comes out. Now, with that being said, not even 10% of what makes Metal Gear Solid 4 was shown before its release, but I'll still not state as much as I can here to help build more hype for you viewers, for those of you who haven't experienced Metal Gear Solid 4. I will point out one thing though, since you probably noticed it in that first-person shooter trailer we just watched. Snake is old. I won't explain why he is, but he's super old and we know this game isn't set too far in the future for Metal Gear Solid 2, so something's up. In Metal Gear Solid 4, we see many advancements in gameplay in comparison to the previous titles. This is a jump from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3, from Metal Gear Solid 3 to Metal Gear Solid 4. So we have a whole new playground of technology to work with. And the most notable thing in this game series at launch is to use the over-the-shoulder aiming system. Additionally, gameplay features that were invaded at the time were active camo, a mind-blowing piece of programming genius where you're able to adjust your camo live on the fly. We had the 6-axis controller coming out at that time, and if you guys didn't know it, the PlayStation 3, when it originally launched, the controller that came out was called the 6-axis, and it did not have rumble features. So a threat ring was developed to help players understand where threats were coming from. And the 6-axis had a little bit of motion control in it, so you could clear your camo by shaking your controller. We have improved enemy tracking through the solid eye system. Improved controls, like I mentioned, the over-the-shoulder, but you can also switch the shoulder that you're shooting from, which is amazing. You can shoot from the left or the right shoulder when you're playing as Snake. You can now move while crouched, and then there is some hilarious new crawling animations that I'll show you as soon as we get in the game. It's freaking hilarious. We now have retained battle damage. This was amazing. Snake will wear cuts, bruises, and burns from battles for long periods of time until he's healed. And then we have the Psych Gauge. It replaces the Stamina Gauge from Metal Gear Solid 3, but it has a little bit more of an impact. Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriot launches June 12th of 2008, nearly 3 years after the announcement of the PlayStation 3 and 2 years after the console's released. It goes on to score a 94% on Metacritic. And as always with history of gaming, we like to compare a game with other games that came out the same year. So keep in mind when we're playing Metal Gear Solid 4 to compare it to things like Grand Theft Auto 4, Left 4 Dead 1, Dead Space 1, Call of Duty World at War, Devil May Cry 4, and the legendary Fallout 3. I do want to go ahead and go through a very quick story recap, and for the point of this, I have a few reasons is my point. Of doing this quick story recap. We've done a lot of recaps, but this one's going to be a little bit more in detail. And the reason why is because Metal Gear Solid 4 is easily the most complicated of all the stories. It's essentially the end of the story. Now, Metal Gear Rising does take place after Metal Gear Solid 4, but it does not have the story content about this franchise that Metal Gear Solid 4 does. So if you're looking for the true end of the story, it's here. So to understand everything that's happened thus far is very critical while we're going through the story. And also, we're doing a time jump again. The last thing we've done was hung out with Big Boss in the 70s, and now we're going to be in 2014. So, this will be a speed recap. And I apologize if anybody has any questions. Please let me know. I'll be more than happy to expand on it. We have our first game, Metal Gear. This takes place in 1995. Big Boss sends in Solid Snake. He plays Solid Snake to Outer Heaven. He gets to Outer Heaven to find the previous Foxhound, that's the team he works for, operative Frank Yeager, aka Gray Fox. He finds Gray Fox. Gray Fox explains there's this big bad weapon called Metal Gear in Outer Heaven and it needs to be destroyed. Snake finds out that Big Boss is actually the guy who runs Outer Heaven, so this mentor of his is actually the bad guy, and he tries to stop Solid Snake. Solid Snake destroys Metal Gear, the entire base, and kills Big Boss. Or so we think. Because then we have Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. 2 years after the events of Metal Gear 1, it is now 1997. There on the screen is the release dates of the games in real life. So 1997, Big Boss has survived the attack from Metal Gear 1. We don't know how. You find out later in this series. And he helps Zanzibar claim independence from Russia, and then they are now renamed Zanzibar Land. 2 years from that, 1999, Roy Campbell is now the head of Foxhound instead of Big Boss. And Foxhound sends in Solid Snake on this mission to rescue a Dr. Keo Marv, who's being held as a hostage. Keel Marv developed a synthetic oil called Oilix that could rid the world of its energy crisis, and Zanzibar, aka Big Boss, is holding him for that ransom. Snake finds out that Big Boss survived, but also that Keel Marv is dead once he gets inside of Zanzibar land, but is able to find the formula for Oilix, so that's kind of a happy middle ground there. Solid Snake is attacked by Gray Fox, who we find out has been turned and has been working with Big Boss. He is now piloting the new Metal Gear R, and Snake destroys that Metal Gear, fights Gray Fox in a minefield after all of his gear burns off, and it's this epic fist fight scene in the middle of a minefield. It's real 80s action hero stuff, real cool. Snake then fights Big Boss and fashions a makeshift flamethrower since his gear's missing, and uses that to defeat Big Boss for real, and he finally dies. That moves us into Metal Gear Solid 1. This takes place in the year 2004, and in 2000, Roy Campbell leaves Foxhound. A man named Liquid Snake joins and takes control over Foxhound. In 2003, 3 years later, Dr. Naomi Hunter develops FoxDie, a virus that can kill specific people based on their DNA. Her original intent is to kill Solid Snake because he killed Frank Yeager, who adopted her as his sister and has been taking care of her since 1979. Fast forward 2 more years to 2005, Foxhound, led by Liquid now, leads an armed revolt on Shadow Moses Island, an island in Alaska. They intend to use Metal Gear Rex, a new Metal Gear that was developed, to fire a nuke at the US if they do not receive, and this is critical, the body of Big Boss and $1 billion within 24 hours. Roy Campbell is pulled back in and put in charge of the mission, and they send in Solid Snake to locate the 2 hostages, to locate 2 hostages, and determine if Liquid can actually launch a nuke. The hostages to be saved are the DARPA chief and the Arms Tech president, a private organization that makes weapons. Snake finds the DARPA chief, who dies immediately from a heart attack when he's talking with him, and then he goes on to find the Arms Tech president, who's being held hostage by a character named Revolver Ocelot, who is now part of the Foxhound team. Snake and Ocelot fight, but their fight is cut short by a cyborg ninja. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. And interrupts them. In that interruption, the cyborg ninja severs the right arm off of Ocelot. That's critical. Ocelot was this really awesome gunslinger. Now he doesn't have his right arm. Everybody splits, and Snake is left with the Arms Tech president. He discussed things with the president, and then the Arms Tech president dies after revealing that he and the DARPA chief were working on Metal Gear for the United States. Arms Tech president dies of a heart attack, much like the DARPA chief did. That's mysterious. How are 2 people dying from the exact same manner that quickly? During the mission, Snake rescues a girl named Meryl Silverberg. She's the daughter of Roy Campbell and the head engineer, Hal Emmerich, who was not aware that Metal Gear was being used as a weapon. So we have Hal and Meryl, who are both saved by Snake. 2 vastly different characters. Meryl's very headstrong and wants to prove herself to her father, Roy Campbell, and Hal wants to make mechs for peace and defense, and he finds out his weapon's being used for mayhem, and he hates it. We also see a guard nicknamed Johnny who appears in this game. He has some stomach issues and is being knocked out by Meryl and left nude on the floor. This is a funny returning joke bit that starts here. So do recall that, because that's important for Metal Gear Solid 4, that there's this Johnny who's kind of like adult and a goof. The cyborg ninja appears, appears in front of Snake at one point in the game, and they have a fight. We learn that the ninja is in fact Frank Yeager or Gray Fox. Snake goes on to fight other bosses, Vulcan Raven, a huge shaman with a minigun. He has a sniper fight with Sniper Wolf, this hot chick with sweet sniper skills out in the snow. It was real cool. Snake learns that Liquid Snake wants to recruit the Grulikovich mercenaries, which is this Russian group, on Shadow Moses to form a new outer heaven, living out the boss's big dream. So we find out that's the whole point of what Liquid's doing. He's trying to relive the boss's hopes and dreams. Solid Snake finds Metal Gear Rex. It's being piloted by Liquid Snake. They begin to battle. Liquid Snake is about to kill Solid. Then Gray Fox intervenes. And there's a bit of a sweet moment between Gray Fox and Solid Snake where Frank Yeager is essentially forgiving Solid Snake and then sacrifices himself, being crushed to death by Metal Gear Rex while saving Solid Snake. Solid Snake goes on to destroy Metal Gear and then fist fights Liquid Snake on top of Metal Gear. It's super awesome and totally 80s. Liquid runs from the battle, but then dies from a heart attack, like the last two people that Snake interacted with. Really weird. During this, we find that Solid and Liquid Snake are clones of Big Boss. The dominant genes were put into Solid Snake, and the recessive genes were put into Liquid Snake. And that's part of the project that they call Les Enfants Terribles, or the Terrible Children. After the mission, Snake speaks with Naomi Hunter, who reveals that she infected him with fox dye with the intent of killing him because of what he had done with Frank Yeager, but then she found out that he was alive. That kind of screws up her plan there. And we find out that fox dye is what killed the DARPA chief, because we actually find out the DARPA chief was in fact not truly him, but another bad guy from Foxhound called Decoy Octopus. The Arms Tech president and Liquid Snake also died from fox dye. So this fox dye virus is kind of like honing in on people and taking out specific people. So it's really interesting. It is then informed to Solid Snake that we don't know how long he has left to live because of fox dye. She apologizes that she infected him with it and she was wrong for what she had done, but it's already too late and fox dye is going to do what it's going to do and we don't know when. We then move to not Twin Snakes. I put up the wrong one. We go to Metal Gear Solid 2. This comes out for the PlayStation 2, and it fast forwards to 2007. Snake and Otacon find out that there's this new Metal Gear called Ray through information provided to Otacon by his stepsister. Her name's Emma Emmerich. Snake locates the Metal Gear on a tanker and gets pictures of it to prove its existence to the world. While getting this intel, the tanker ship is taken over by these Guru Lukovich soldiers. And we find out that Ocelot is with them. Additionally, the daughter of Guru Lukovich leader is shown. Her name is Olga, and we find out she's pregnant. That's critical for a different point in the series, but not for the game of Metal Gear Solid 2. But do remember that Olga Guru Lukovich is pregnant. Ocelot appears to steal Metal Gear Ray from the U.S. Marines that were being briefed on it. And in the middle of this, you find out he has his right arm back, and we don't know how. It got cut off by the ninja, but now it's back. Well, the reality is he took the right arm of Liquid Snake and sewed it on, of course. Reason being is Liquid Snake was the recessive genes and a clone. That means his molecules, I guess is the best way to put it, his genes are very malleable, and he's the recessive genes, which means it's not a dominant set of genes in the arm, so therefore it is going to be a little bit more acceptance of being put with another body, I guess, is kind of the sci-fi there. So he's got Liquid's arm, but it appears that the arm is somehow taking over Ocelot at times. We hear his voice change into Liquid's voice, the mannerisms, everything except for his looks change, and all of a sudden Liquid is kind of taking over Ocelot. So we'll see what happens there. That doesn't get resolved in Metal Gear Solid 2. We have some names tossed around during this little hijacking of Metal Gear Ray by Ocelot. He says that he's serving a Solidus Snake, and he states that he is not, in fact, working directly for Solidus Snake, but working for the Patriots. When this is uttered, the man named Scott Dolph, the commander of the Marines, says, when he says, I'm working for the Patriots, instead of going, the Patriots, Scott Dolph responds with, lale lule lo. We find out why. In this game as well, in Metal Gear Solid 4, we find out why he says that. Sometime later, we pick up the story again, and we're playing as this new character, Raiden, and it's a massive, not cool surprise for fans. We hated this. Snake was supposed to be the character we played for the whole game, not for just 20 minutes, but now we got this dumb Raiden. But Raiden answers to Roy Campbell, who sends him on a mission to this location called Big Shell, where a terrorist group called the Sons of Liberty have taken the president of the U.S. hostage. Group claims to be headed by someone posing as Solid Snake. Foxhound sends in Raiden, who is helped by the true Solid Snake, who's going under the name of Iroquois Pliskin, a reference to Escape from New York, the movie. And then we go through some boss battles for these Sons of Liberties. We fight Fat Man, an explosive nut job, in a bomb suit on rollerblades. Then we fight Vamp, an actual freaking vampire. We also fight Fortune, this woman who uses this massive railgun and can't be hit by any bullets. Bullets just go around her. Doesn't make any sense. We find out the imposter, the imposing Solid Snake is in fact Solidus Snake, seemingly a third clone from the Les Enfants Terribles project. So there is a third son of Big Boss. We find out that Big Shell, this huge tanker out in the middle of the water, is actually a massive Metal Gear called Arsenal Gear. and it holds the Patriots AI. So we now know that the Patriots are these super advanced AIs that are made to control major powers in the world through political manipulation and war. Emma, again Otacon's stepsister, assists the heroes in creating a virus to destroy the AIs, but regrettably she dies in the process. Otacon gets really messed up by it. It's a super heavy scene. It's pretty messed up. Her dying really screws up Otacon. Later, we have Ocelot show up, revealing that Raiden's entire mission was actually a simulation created by the Patriots to replicate the events of Shadow Moses in an attempt to make a new super soldier like that of Big Boss and Solid Snake. The Patriots state that Raiden must kill Solidus Snake, or they will kill his loved one, Rosemary, this girl that he's sweet on. Raiden and Snake work together to kill a bunch of Metal Gear Rays, and then Solidus reveals that he was Raiden's foster father the whole time. Big crazy twist of events. Ocelot also reveals that Fortune's special power of being dodged by bullets is actually an EM device that he planted on her. He turns it off, shoots her. And in a sad little moment there, we find out that she was married to Scott Dolph, and she wanted revenge for his death. So pretty sad stuff there too. Raiden's livid that he's being manipulated by the Patriots, so he does kill Solidus and then vows to hunt down the Patriots. So, from that point, we have a bit of a time warp, and we go to Metal Gear Solid 3. Metal Gear Solid 3 goes all the way back to 1964. So we're talking Cold War era, and this is where the story really gets super crazy and complicated. We have the United States sends in this special agent called the Boss, this really awesome woman of special ops. She's just amazing. She goes into Russia to find this thing called the Philosopher's Legacy. It's a collection of data that leads to bank accounts that have tons of money in it. Thank you for the follow. So this tons of money was put together because the biggest powers in the world after World War II came together and they put aside this money as a failsafe or a struggle for power, who knows, but basically we have these big powerhouse countries putting together a ton of money and then the money goes missing. So there's this microfilm somewhere in Russia that has the data that leads to this Philosopher's Legacy. She's sent in, she's supposed to find it. Additionally, Fox, which is the predecessor team of Foxhound, sends in Naked Snake. This would soon become Big Boss. He is sent into Russia to find and recover Sokolov, a scientist who's defecting, as well as destroy a Russian weapon developed by Sokolov called the Shagohod. This mission was called the Virtuous Mission. He goes in, with the support of a few characters that is important to remember these names, Major Zero, Signant, and Paramedic. They support him over the radio as he does the Virtuous Mission. Snakes almost succeeds in getting Sokolov out, but is stopped by his former mentor, the Boss. She absolutely whoops his ass on this bridge and tosses him over the side. Not only that, but she reveals that she is handed over these deployable nukes, man-deployable nukes. It doesn't have to be launched from a missile or anything, called Davy Crockett's. They're these little small nukes. Think the Fat Man from Fallout. And that she's handed these nukes over to Colonel Vogan, a big bad Russian dude, and she's also defecting. So think of this nuke that could be launched like an RPG being handed to this big bad Russian guy, and she goes, "I'm not working for America anymore." And he's like, "Nani?" And then gets thrown off of the bridge and falls into this river. He does survive narrowly, and while he's down there healing himself, they get into helicopters. This bad guy team that supports the Boss called the Cobra Unit, the Boss herself, and then Volgin. They all get inside this helicopter and they're taking off, and Snake's down there, and he's like, "God, this sucks." And Volgin takes the nuke, cracks it off, and destroys a Russian research facility. This is pivotal. Pivotal. It's the reason why everything else happens in Metal Gear is because he launches that nuke. So I mentioned the Cobra Unit that's led by the Boss. They turn out to be the boss fights like we've had from Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2. We fight the Pain. He's this bee-controlling dude covered in bee stings. It's terrifying. Then we have the Fear, this freaky dude who can crab walk up trees, and he loves shooting poison darts out of his crossbow. He's a freak. And then we have the Fury, this super angry astronaut with a jetpack and a flamethrower. He was a nightmare to fight. And then we have probably one of the coolest boss fights in video game history, the End. It's this super old dude who's part plant and part 6 sniper. and you have to fight him over 3 different forest-ridden battle maps, and it's really hard to fight him. One of the cool things about that fight is if you save the game and not play it for like a couple weeks, or maybe it's a few hours, I forget, but if you leave the game save for too long in the middle of that fight, when you come back, the end dies of old age. Pretty funny. So the nuke that Volgin sets off causes all kinds of issues in Russia. For the U.S., Russia and for the U.S. So the Russian president calls the U.S. president and says that you are required to prove that you were not involved with the nuke attack. And that it was in fact set up by Volgin, and that your operative, the boss, has defected to our country. So, the US is forced to decide to send in Naked Snake yet again with the goal of killing the boss, Colonel Volgin, and destroying the Shagohod. And this is going to be called Operation Snake Eater. This is important because the US had sent in Boss to infiltrate, locate, and deliver the Philosopher's Legacy, and that mission's still ongoing. So the U.S. has to state she defected because of what Volgin did. And because Snake ran into her, she had to say that she defected as well. So she's kind of screwed in the situation, so she's still doing her job. The KGB put Naked Snake in contact with 2 NSA agents who defected to Russia in the 1960s to assist them. They are using the codenames of Adam and Eva, which is cool because it's Adam, Eve, and Snake. Get it? We meet Eva, and she says Adam's not coming, and she was sent in his place. Makes us a little bit uneasy at first. We then meet Ocelot for the first time. He's this young kid. Naked Snake absolutely whoops him real good, makes him feel real bad about his gun and how he shoots it. We'll continue to run into Ocelot again, and we slowly see him improve into this insane gunman that he becomes in Metal Gear Solid 1. Snake then gets caught eventually during his little rampage to find the boss and Volgin and destroy Shagohod, and he's interrogated by Volgin, the boss, and Ocelot. In the process, he takes a gunshot wound and loses his eye. From this point on, we see Big Boss with the eye patch, and this is where that iconic eye patch comes from. This is the event that did it. Snake defeats Colonel Volgin later and destroys the Shagohod in the process. Volgin had the legacy for a period of time, but the boss took it for safekeeping. She then gives it to Eva during one of the cutscenes. So we now have Eva with the legacy. So we found it, Eva's got it, she's a good guy, she's helping Snake out. So what Snake doesn't know, though, is that Eva's actually a triple spy. She's not a spy who's working for Russia or who's working for America. She's actually working for the Chinese governments and triple-crossing everybody in the process. So we now learn that China wants a legacy, because it was probably China, the US, the United Kingdom, and Russia that formed the original legacy. So all these countries probably have a stake and are aware that the legacy even exists. Funny thing is we know what the US is trying to do to get their hands on it. We know what Russia's trying to do to get their hands on it. We now know what China's doing to try and get their hands on the Philosopher's Legacy. But the UK they don't have a stake in this? Huh. Do we remember any British people in this game? I don't know. We'll get back to that. But the big twist is revealed much later after the credits when we find out that Ocelot was actually in fact Adam, and the microfilm that Eva had was in fact a fake. And Adam, aka Ocelot, has the true Philosopher's Legacy. Ocelot gives the legacy to the US government, but it's only half of what is recovered. It is assumed that the remaining half is still in KGB hands, and Snake eventually finds out that the boss did not truly defect, but was working deep undercover to get the legacy, and at this point, she accepts that Naked Snake must kill her for the sake of her mission and his mission. She is a hero to her country, but will forever be remembered as a traitor. Snake defeats the boss, he is awarded the title of Big Boss, and that really messes him up. It changes him. And there it is, kind of a long-winded but short wrap, that's still short compared to what actually happens, wrap-up version of what's happened thus far. So where do we pick up the story? That would be after Metal Gear Solid 2, as the story goes, and it is now 2014, 7 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid 2. We've survived the story that got us this far. We've survived Kojima trying to run away from us, and some of the more insane of us drug him back in. We got Metal Gear Solid 4. But, Snake's old, man. He's tired. He's fed up of war. And we don't know why he's so tired and old now. You know, it's weird. And then something happens, okay? This game comes out in 2008. It is the year 2006, 2 years prior to the game coming out. And I know what Kojima wants from the series. I know Snake has gotten old and he's sick of war, and I know that Kojima wants to walk away and put this to rest. And I'm looking around the internet, and I'm trying to find some data about Metal Gear Solid 4. Now, a couple of warnings here. This is a very old video. It's pixelated, and it was leaked back in 2006, so it didn't even have good footage back then. There's no sound, and on top of all of that, this is very heavy, the content that's going to be shown here. So, be prepared for that. But I'm not showing this to spoil anything. I'm showing this because this is part of what makes Metal Gear, and Kojima. Well, I'll go ahead and just show you what I stumbled on in 2006. And there you have it. A leaked video with very heavy stuff. That is the only copy I can find anywhere on the internet of it without the appropriate sound. Heavy, heavy, heavy. We walk into Metal Gear 4 thinking that Solid Snake's decided to kill himself. Well, I promised you guys I don't spoil games for you guys when we play stuff in History of Gaming Metal Gear, so we'll have to figure out how that doesn't end up being a spoiler. And we need to get into a little game called Metal Gear Solid 4.